Okay, we'll kind of sort of get started. Minor technical difficulties, which will hopefully be resolved in the next 2 minutes.
It's 7.
Yeah. So, some minor administrative notes. The big raffle happens at the end of the evening. So, and the good news is there's like 13 books here and there's 17 people here. So the likelihood of your winning something is pretty high. The books are roughly arranged from most entry level to most complicated. So my only suggestion is, if you win one, then like pick whatever you think is normal for you and then go one step harder. So, and there's everything here from like really basic sort of stuff to like there's some fiction if you're not like and if you're really not a reader at all, none of this looks interesting, then Christmas is coming. So you probably know somebody who would want it. So let's go ahead and open in a word of prayer. Lord God, I thank you for this day and I thank you for getting us all here safely. Thank you that the weather's nice and hot and that summer's here. And we thank you for shepherding us through the last 5 weeks and for hopefully helping everyone here not only learn some things, but also definitely helping me learn some things. And that's one of the great things about doing a class like this is I learn at least as much as everybody else. And I thank you for that. And thank you that you are watching over our minds as well as our hearts, and that you will not leave either one alone, but that you are working hard to make us more like you and to make us people who love sacrificially and obey you ardently and want to get to know you better all the time. And we thank you for your presence here and pray that you'd stay with us and help keep us mentally sharp and focused right up until the very end, and also have a good time tonight. In your son's name, amen. Tonight, just to give you a little preview while we're waiting for that electronic device to show up, each of your desks has a little piece of paper there. If you're by yourself, that's fine, or you can join another group. The exercise we'll be doing a little bit later on kind of experimenting with AI. For those of you who are worried, Elizabeth was just asking me, what if I don't like AI? As we will discuss when we get that far, this isn't really AI. They call it AI, but it's really, it's a large language model. It takes words and sticks them together in ways that you think would work. It's sort of as close to popular level AI as they have right now. There are definitely more sophisticated systems out there, especially ones that are more focused on particular things. The one I'm most familiar with personally is programs that read X-rays and CAT scans and MRIs. And those are pretty much at the point now where they're doing a better job than the radiologists. It's interesting, for a long time, if you wanted to get a really nice medical job, if you wanted a cushy residency and you didn't feel like doing dermatology, you would go into radiology. You didn't have to touch people, you didn't have to have people sneezing on you, there wasn't any fluids, you just sat there and looked at X-rays all day. Those jobs are pretty much going away. I mean, if you're about ready to retire, you probably are in good shape, but don't start a radiology residency that's focused on that. So for a while, they were outsourcing everything to India and the Philippines. You can get a radiologist to read an X-ray in India a lot cheaper than you can get one to read one in the US. Even that's going away now because you can just feed it into a computer and the computer spits it out. I am personally familiar with machine reads of EKGs. You go in and they stick the wires all over you and it spits out an EKG and it says, possible anteroseptal infarct, age indeterminate, blah, blah, blah. We've historically always just ignored that because it gets it wrong about 90% of the time. But 10% of the time, it says something that at least warrants further investigation, but 90% of the time it's like, yeah, whatever. But even that's starting to get a lot better now, and there's fewer false positives. So that's kind of real AI, but we're going to experiment with sort of the more popular level AI a little bit today and see how well it works. And I think you may find it amusing. Has anyone, some of you, sent back your homework responses with the answers to those questions, but has anyone experimented with AI beyond just your basic Google search level? One person? I have a little bit just for fun. It's fun to sort of play Stump the AI, which is what we're going to be doing here in a minute. So what we're actually talking about tonight is, I know last week we spent some time talking about evolution creation issues, and those get a lot of press. But it's at least my conviction that the thing that's actually going to affect people's lives for the next 50 years is advances in artificial intelligence and particularly big data handling. And they kind of go hand in hand, but they're not exactly the same thing. I'm going to try hard today not to spend my whole time criticizing the People's Republic of China, because I love the People's Republic of China. I think they are great, and I just want you to know that I think they're great, and I welcome, anyway. No, never. They're everywhere. That's anyway. That's kind of and that's kind of my point. That as much as we're concerned about, is Palantir and Google and Yahoo just scraping the web for every bit of information they can get about you, so that they know what Dave wants to buy for Christmas even before he knows what he wants to buy for Christmas, and it's almost getting to that point. The standard joke is that the U.S. mail delivers your mail and it sort of throws it at your front porch, and half of it gets stolen, and UPS does similar, and Amazon is at the point where, like, hey, that toaster you ordered yesterday, actually we sent it to you 3 days ago. It's already sitting inside your kitchen. Look for it there. And it's almost getting to that point in some cases. Here in the People's Republic of China, it's much more intentional, and there are no breaks. I mean, privacy laws are not really an issue, and whatever information they can scrape about all of their citizens and everyone else outside the country is already being sucked into centralized databases and used to predict behavior. I'll go ahead and mention this so we can skip the slide later. Has anyone heard of their plan for social credit scores? Yeah, the social credit system. Basically, if you attend a rally that's a good Communist Party rally, you get plus points. If you attend an underground church, you get a lot of minus points. If you attend a protest against the government, then you're like in the toilet. And your social credit score determines things like what kind of jobs you can get, what kind of schools you can go to, what kind of loans you can get, even whether or not you can use public transit. If your credit score is low enough, they don't let you onto the trains. Now, so if you're really worried about one world government, then that's probably kind of more what it's going to look like. I don't know if this is good or bad. The Chinese government is trying to put a positive spin on it. This is good for social stability. This is good for maintaining peace and prosperity, and for government to be able to predict economic trends, and it's going to be better for everybody this way. Okay, maybe. I'm not sure that I buy that necessarily, but so we will talk about that in a few minutes, hopefully. One of the things, and this is going to be another thing that comes up all the time today, we already talked about eschatology. So people remember what that is? It's more than just, what happens to Israel. It's what happens to humanity in general. And most of what we're talking about today are secular eschatologies. And frankly, for instance, the Chinese government, that is a secular eschatology. If we get enough big data together, we have information on every citizen, we have every single keystroke as it is typed into a computer is logged and processed through a central database. Every person's movements are noted at every point. Then we will be able to not only see who the troublemakers are and get them out of the way, we will be able to make sure that you do not ever want to become a troublemaker. Elizabeth really, really likes ponies. I don't know. You don't. But so therefore, the centralized database lets everyone who cares know that if you really want to get on her good side, then give her a pony. So if she's threatening to attend a political rally that's against the Chinese government, then all you do is you just make sure that somebody has a pony sitting outside her front door as she's getting ready to leave. And she'll never get there, and she'll be happy about it. So it's almost a kinder, gentler sort of totalitarianism. At least that's sort of the theory. It very much depends on whether you are a Han Chinese or a Uyghur at this point. But that's the theory anyway. Okay, so anyway, this is what we're talking about in general today. What is a human, and other questions for the 21st century? I don't know, could anyone here identify all 6 of those pictures? Probably most people can do 4. You can probably at least do 2 or 3. The one in the middle, of course, Star Trek, that's obvious. This one?
Matrix.
From the Matrix, yeah, which is, Terminator, he'll be back. Blade Runner, yeah, and that's a very underrated movie. I mean, if you're into discussing what is a human being, that's one of the few recent popular movies that asks that pretty explicitly. This one you probably don't recognize specifically, I don't either, but this is from a book written in about 1950. About what it's going to look like in 1985. And then finally, this is, if any of you remember Omni magazine, that was, the magazine for sophisticated people to read in about 1980. This is what humans are going to look like in a million years. So so this is eschatology. We all have an eschatology. Again, the Chinese government is one particular kind of eschatology. Elon Musk has a different kind. Christianity has a third kind. Secular eschatologies can be Gnostic in character. In other words, what that means is we're trying to escape our bodies. Human beings are basically just our brains trapped inside physical bodies, and the goal is to get out of the body because the body is limiting, the body gets diseased, the body gets sick, the body can be injured, the body can die. The solution is to get outside your body. And in extreme cases, that means you can just upload your consciousness to the web. Has anyone heard that concept before? Yeah, it's a nice theory. The theory being that if, that's the capital IF, If humanity, meaning the human mind, is comprehensively described by neural connections inside a cranium, different neurons talking to each other, we're using neurotransmitters and electrical impulses, and you can duplicate that in a computer, then you have just duplicated the human being. If someone sucked all of that information out of my head and stuck it in a computer, would that be me? That's an interesting thought. If you are a strict materialist, the answer is yes. It can't not be you, because everything that defines you is defined by the neural connections in your head. Now, that's an interesting philosophical problem, because the other reason Star Trek came up, you all heard of the transporter? You know, you step in the box, and I don't know, this is a little bit nerdy canon, but the whole theory behind how the transporter works is it scans your entire body, puts you into the pattern buffer, including the quantum states of all of your particles, converts that 100% to energy, beams it down to the planet, and then reassembles everything in the exact same state it was when it scanned you. And that's you. The issue, of course, is that really you, or does that just look like you and act like you according to everyone who's around you, and really the transporter just killed you? So maybe Dr. McCoy was right all along. So anyway, that's the highly Gnostic version. There's also a somewhat more technological version that says that utopia comes when humans just solve all of their problems through technology. And we're already getting there, I mean, in theory. A lot of this boils down to what is a human? Some of the usual answers. The interesting thing with Judaism and Christianity is it was kind of a weird answer. For the Babylonians and the Syrians, humans were basically just slaves of the gods. That was your job. Your job was to worship them, supply them almost literally with food and drink, to do your work for them, to manage the canals and to plant crops and to do the things that God wants you to do. Greece and Rome, back in classical times, was a little bit more sophisticated. There was the beginning of an explicit Gnostic idea that humans are basically sparks of the divine trapped inside these terrible bodies, and the goal was to escape. That was a very Platonic idea. Aristotle basically agreed with that, but he also kind of modified that in the here and now, humans were basically animals with rational souls. And of course, the animal part, if you died, the rational soul carried on. And then it comes along Judaism, which does this weird thing where it has God creates humans intentionally. He creates them good. He creates them male and female. And he creates them in the image of God. And those were all really weird concepts. If you went back to ancient Egypt and said, are humans in the image of God? Then you would get just kind of a quizzical sort of, what are you talking about kind of look. Maybe Pharaoh is sort of in the image of God, but certainly the average person is not. Early Christianity, they of course agreed with Judaism in most of this, but they had a much more explicit battle with the Gnostic ideal. The way this worked itself out turned out was a really nice thing, because Christians would do this thing like stay in the cities and take care of the sick even when the plague was going on, because they actually cared about bodies. So it wasn't just a matter of, well, I hope the plague kills me fast so my consciousness can go off to the Elysian fields. Hopefully it's that the body actually does matter. Augustine, did I put it here? Yes. Has anyone here read the Confessions? One person. How did I know it was Elizabeth? Yeah, so the interesting thing about the Confessions, it's just what it sounds like. It's his confessions, but it's kind of basically sort of his extended testimony. The interesting thing about it is that not only does he very much agree that humans are bodies and souls together, and you can't have a real human without having both of them. He also does this weird thing. Some people say he's really the first person to be aware of individualism. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but if you read autobiographies of Caesar or autobiographies of Josephus or autobiographies of Cicero, you largely get I did this and I did that and I did this and I did that. And if you read Caesar's, it's I did this and it was glorious and I did that and it shows how incredibly amazing I was. When you read Augustine, it does talk about what he does, but importantly it also says, and here's what I thought about it, and here's what I thought about what I thought about it, and here's why I'm a worm for thinking what I thought about it, and here's how God was helping me realize that I was a worm for thinking what I thought about it. So it's much more psychological and much more individual, and it's something that we kind of take for granted. If you look back at a lot of ancient literature, that's a rarity. But this whole idea of, again, if you went back to especially, say, 2nd century Christianity and said, have you invited Jesus into your heart? Your average Christian will look at you like, what are you talking about? There's no heart inviting Jesus into your... What? Do you accept the creeds and catechisms, and are you willing to acknowledge Jesus as Lord and even be fed to the lions for that? Is that what you mean? Then I know what you're talking about. But this sense of individualism was both a good thing and a bad thing, as we'll get to in a minute. Modern conceptions of humanity, who's that guy? Yes, Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, The Rise of Sociology and Anthropology as Topics of Study and as Sciences. A human is a human insofar as it's involved in communities. That was sociology and Emil Durkheim, if you've ever heard that name before. Freud was, as Augustine, some people say actually that Freud is just Augustine if Augustine were a heretic. Freud had a strong sense of the idea of the individual and things that, again, we take for granted, this idea that you can have motives that you don't even know about, that other people might be able to tell, but you can't tell, that drive your behavior. That was Freud. Again, that's was not entirely unique to him, but he was the first guy to actually sort of popularize it. And again, that's kind of one of those things that is orthodoxy today in the wider culture. If you want to know who you are, you look deep inside yourself. You find out all of your subconscious drives and desires, and then the goal is to bring that out and express it. And insofar as you do that, you are an actualized human being. Again, if you went back to ancient times, if you went back to Cicero or to Moses and said, what does it mean for you to be a fulfilled human being? Do you look inside yourself and see what's in there? They would say, no. What you are is determined by the people around you, where you are in society, what people tell you to do. If you are Moses' son, then guess what? You've already been circumcised, and I didn't ask your permission for that. And guess what? I'm going to raise you in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And I'm not doing this to be mean to you. I'm doing this because that is your identity. And that's something you'll grow up with. And 99% of people said, yes, I really like that idea. And that's what they grew up with. And the modern individualist idea of I've got to look inside myself and find something that's unique and different that I personally must express myself, that's a uniquely modern idea. We've already talked a little bit about philosophical materialism and how that alters how people look at the world. Again, the idea is that to be a materialist is to believe that everything in the universe is described comprehensively by matter, energy, space-time, and physical laws. If you can't describe it in one of those ways, it either doesn't exist or at best it's kind of a personal opinion. If you like pineapple on pizza, that's fine, but that cannot rise to the level of E equals mc squared, or if you mix sodium and chlorine together, you get table salt. Now the problem, and if you want to see this kind of in action, Lawrence Krauss is a physicist who, as far as I know, is the only guy who's written a modern defense of materialism, like in an actual, this is the way you should think. He has a book called The Story of Reality. Don't quote me on that. Incidentally, I forgot to give you the note sheet, but I will email it out to you that has all these references on it. So he's the only guy I've seen recently that actually tries to argue there is no God, there is no soul, there's nothing other than matter, energy, space, time, and physical laws, and here's the reasons why I think that's true. This guy, Sam Harris, is not as rigorous an arguer about that, but he has written several books on the consequences of that. One called The Moral Landscape, which basically argues that that which is good is that which results in the flourishing of conscious agents. He doesn't even restrict it to humans. I think I've shared this once before, that since it's conscious agents, in theory, space aliens could come and if they decide they want to eat you, and that results in their flourishing to a greater extent that your not being eaten would result in your flourishing, then you are actually immoral to oppose that. Now that's wacky and weird, but it's also very consistent. And of course, if you go to him actually, and he says this fairly explicitly in his book, if you say, why are you favoring conscious beings? Why do humans get to live in rocks? If I want to step on a rock and smash it into bits, that's fine. But why is that fine? Doesn't a rock deserve to be a rock? And his response to that is just, you're dumb. Stop talking. So at some point, and that kind of other brings up the other. Everybody has to have a backstop. So for him, it's just the flourishing of conscious beings. That is the backstop. No discussion beyond that. Has anyone here read Beyond Virtue, Alistair McIntyre? It's kind of one of those things that was a really hot book about 20 years ago. Alistair McIntyre he's not a Christian, but he's very sort of Christian friendly. And he argues that one of the other results of materialism, similar to what Sam Harris argues, is that when I say something is good or something is bad, as a materialist, the best you can say is that's really just sort of a glorified way of saying, I like this thing, I think you should like it too. Or I hate this thing, you should hate it too. So when I say, rape is wrong, what that means is I would prefer that you not rape people, and I think you ought to agree with me. That is the backstop. That is the end. There is no further discussion beyond that. Again, we can look at that and say that's sterile, that's terrible, that's awful. And Alistair McIntyre says, yes, I agree, but that's the best you got right now, unless you're going to start dragging in weird concepts like God. Now, there was a group of people in the 20th century who said, this is really too much. I don't believe in God, I don't believe in souls, I don't believe in mind, but this is just nuts. And we generally refer to them now as the existentialists. Anybody recognize that guy in the lower right? Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone Beauvoir. The other one I've quoted here, I know, is Camus, that thing about the meaning of life is whatever keeps you from killing yourself. He was an existentialist also. Now, the interesting things about the existentialism is not a happy philosophy, as you can tell. So, and really the existentialists' position was they were all materialists, but they were materialists with a different sort of backstop. It wasn't, the backstop was, yes, human beings are basically just big bags of meat chemicals, but we are unique bags of meat chemicals because we can make decisions. We can decide what's important and what's not. We can make choices. We can embrace the terrible freedom that's given us as human beings. And that's an expression that comes up over and over in the existentialists. You're this terrible freedom that you have as a human being. Now, ideally, you use that freedom for things like going and serving the poor or finding a cure for cancer. But most of the existentialists were pretty blunt about if you pick something else, you're still expressing your freedom, you're still choosing. And as it came out later meaning as late as the 1990s, Beauvoir and Sartre were both, if they were alive today, they would be in prison. They were basically the Epstein and, what was the name? Maxwell, yes. They were sort of the Epstein and Maxwell of their day, basically. So they were wealthy, they were powerful, and there came out multiple allegations of unsavory behavior that I will not go into in a church environment. So, but again, if you're an existentialist, you chose, and you chose boldly. You went against social convention, which proves that you were really being authentic. Of course, no one believes that anymore, except these people. So the modern version, there's an existentialism light, which is basically just existentialism with an optimistic spin on it. And it's pretty much a unique American thing. You can tell you're looking at an American movie when they're all existentialists and everybody's happy at the end. And you can tell you're looking at a European movie when everybody's an existentialist and the Germans all die, the Russians all kill each other, the French go on living, but everyone is really depressed. So, Americans don't do that. You only do happy things. So I choose what is valuable to me, or I live in the moment or the now, or I experience life to its fullest. Some of the modern people who would be explicit in this, Oprah is very obvious multiple times. Viktor Frankl, if you've ever heard of him, psychologist. Joseph Campbell, who himself was a big influence on George Lucas. Carl Sagan, and Cary Grant. Cary Grant he didn't write books, but he gave quite a few interviews where he was very explicit about this. So it's an assumed philosophy in most movies and daily life in the United States. No one can tell you what to believe. We're all different. The culture of affirmation, you do you. That's intention today, as you all know very well, there is a certain, you do you only works up to a point. The joke is that you do you, but not like that. There's certain things that you cannot do if you want to you be you. So you can't join the KKK. I don't care how much you look inside you and you really feel like you're a white person who really needs to affirm your whiteness. Please don't do that. There is some tension here. It waxes and wanes, as you all have seen in the media. When I say this is common in modern culture, this really is assumed. The homework I sent out to you this last week, asked what is the meaning of life. For those of you who sent it back, about 2/3 of you I would say kind of, more or less got it right. In other words, it has something to do with God and how humans are made and what the goal of being a human is. One of our sons, this is our biggest homeschool failure moment. One of our sons, who I will not give you his name, got a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right. I asked him once, so what is the meaning of life? And he told me, well, I don't know, nobody knows. And I was like, well, does that fit with, what you've been learning elsewhere? And he's like, what are you talking about? Like Awana? It's like, oh, you mean like, to follow after God? Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yes, to come to know God, enjoy his presence forever, being glory to him. Oh, yeah, okay, that's what I mean. But his reflexive response was, I don't know, and nobody does. And that is by far the most common response. If you push people with it, then that's almost always the response you'll get. If you say to somebody, what's the meaning of life? Well, I really like spending time with my family, and I have dogs. Dogs are great. Aren't dogs great? It's like, yes, dogs are great, but why are you doing that as opposed to anything else? It's like, well, just because I like that, it's me. It's like, so is it just all about what you personally like? Well, kinda. Okay. What if somebody else likes something different? Well, that's them. So behind it all is a barely concealed nihilism. Since you can pick anything and be anyone, nothing really matters. You like dogs? I like cats. I like pineapple on my pizza. You think that's an abomination. I think whites should run the country and kick out all the brown people. You think that's terrible. Whatever. That's where I came up with. Do anybody know who's in the lower left? Syndrome. Sorry, lower right. Yeah, that's syndrome. The whole goal was to make everyone have superpowers, and when everyone has it, then no one has it. So it's the same idea. If everyone can make up your own meaning, then there is no meaning. If you are going to go with that, and you are living in a highly technological modern society, you become a transhumanist. So what is transhumanism? Well, here's the basic argument. If reality is comprehensively described by matter, energy, space-time, physical law, and if therefore humans are basically just smart gorillas, and evolution is an ongoing and unguided process, then, logically, humanity is only a relatively brief stop on the march of time. We're kind of a bus stop in this very long bus route. Indications are that our time is coming to an end. When I say that our time is coming to an end, I don't mean humans are necessarily going to go extinct, although that is a possibility. But humans as humans are coming to an end. This is the transhumanist argument. Again, if you it's not hard to find, well, first of all, it's very hard to find people who've thought much about this beyond a highly superficial level of, yeah, wouldn't it be great if AI did stuff? If you do run into people who are more into the transhumanist project, there's a variety of things that make it more plausible. First of all, is this general acceptance of science, although as I've harped on multiple times, it isn't really science, it's scientism. It's taking science and expanding it into areas that science doesn't really know anything about. One of the other things you'll see people talking about, and this was one of the things that impressed me when I first got to know Carl Sagan back as a 14-year-old, was this idea of a cosmic calendar. Basically, you take all of, and we're talking deep time here, so 14.5 billion years. You take that entire history and compress it into a single year. And what you wind up with is the sun doesn't even exist until you get to about September. So you've got 9 months of basically just energy floating around in space. Humans don't actually exist until towards the end of December. Human history, humans start at about the last half an hour of December 31st at the end of the year. And actual written down history we know anything about, is all in about the last minute. So when people look at that, they say, well, what are humans really? I mean, come on, we occupy 1 minute out of an entire year of minutes. What is it? You can feel pretty small, and you kind of feel like just sort of a hairless ape at that point. So as some of you know, I don't particularly like Ken Ham's methods, but he is right about one thing, which is that if you see history as being 14.5 billion years long, and you see humanity as existing since, the ancient Egyptians basically, then yeah, we kind of are just sort of a burp on matter at that point. I mean, just kind of like, okay, there's a little blip over there. Okay, let's move on now. So, and of course, C.S. Lewis had some things to say about that, but I won't get into that. He was not impressed, but it's easy to feel impressed by that. Let's put it that way. Here's some current trends that one of the reasons why the Transhumanist Project says things are different now. This is a really kind of fun graph. It's not that you can read all the little fine print, but it's price performance of computation. So the bottom scale goes from 1939 to 2023. The vertical scale is computations per second per adjusted dollar. So it's all inflation adjusted, and it's computations per second per dollar. So for instance, in 1950, if you can see that small enough, you could get about 1 computation per second per dollar. Now, there was no such thing as a $1 computer in 1950, but if you spent $10,000 on a computer, then you could get something that would do about 10,000 computations per second. So that was considered, that was a room-sized computer that was really fancy in 1950. Now, if you come up to 2000, which is when I bought my first desktop, you can get basically about 100 million computations per dollar per second. Now, I spent about $1,000 on my first computer, so that's 100 billion computations per second. Now, that's faster than my CPU is going by quite a bit, but this is computations in a general sense. So this includes, graphics processing units and all the coprocessors, and if you're running things in parallel streams and all that kind of thing. Now, the interesting thing to note is the vertical scale is actually logarithmic. So it's not going up like this, it's actually going up like that. So the argument goes that given another 10 or 20 years, computational power will effectively be infinite, however you want to define infinite, not technically infinite in a mathematical sense, but it will make anything we do today look like computers in 1930. So what does that mean? Well, that means if we can convince computers to help us, then ongoing human concerns with war, disease, death, and suffering, all those things can be outsourced to computers, which will come up with the answer. So the next humanity will be governed by, integrated with, or replaced by artificial intelligence, AI, or artificial general intelligence, AGI, and or we will become silicon life forms or some combination thereof. Now, what's people's reaction to this so far?
What's the AGI is?
Artificial general intelligence. Now, just as a minor point, people will say, people meaning like I'm talking about the guys on this page, will say there's a difference between AI, artificial intelligence, like the thing that reads X-rays, and artificial general intelligence, which artificial general intelligence will say, hey, I've been reading X-rays all day. You know what would be really interesting? If we could increase the resolution on these X-rays, I could read them a lot better. Here's a plan. I've read all the books on radiology and on radiation physics. I've just created blueprints for a machine which will quadruple the resolution you can get out of a standard CT scanner. Maybe you should try that and get back to me. That's what an AGI would do, as opposed to it would not just do the task in front of it. It would say, this is an interesting task. Why am I restricted to this task? There's so much more I could be doing. And here's a whole bunch of bigger suggestions. So that's AGI. These, I put these up here just so you kind of recognize the people. Ray Kurzweil, who's in the upper left, he's currently at Google. He wrote a book called The Age of Spiritual Machines, if that gives you some idea of where he's coming from. Interesting thing, he's also famous for this quote, does God exist? Someone asked him in an interview, does God exist? His response, not yet. So, and that fits really well with the guy in the upper right, who's Yuval Harari, who wrote a whole book called, the name of the book, if you know your Latin, the name of the book is Homo Deus. It's not Homo sapiens, it's Homo Deus. The man God, and he's not talking about Jesus, he's talking about ordinary people. And again, that's the similar idea that humans will effectively become gods, and he's clear, this, I'm not talking capital G, he doesn't want to step on anybody's toes here, he's talking small g, more like Zeus or Apollo. In other words, at some point in the future, if I'm thinking, hey, that guy really needs a lightning bolt, then I would think in my head, that guy needs a lightning bolt, the AI would read my thoughts, would come up with a plan to create an energy weapon that would shoot lightning at people and would manufacture it for me and would zap that person for me. So functionally, I'm acting like Zeus. There you go, lightning bolt. Say, well, that seems kind of ridiculous. Okay, it's not ridiculous to a lot of people who are, again, thinking about this. So if it seems ridiculous to you, I think you might be right, but we're getting there. Elon Musk is another guy lower left. Most people are familiar with him by now. He's a little sloppier. He's not a thinker quite in the same sense that Kurzweil or Harari is. But he is, most of you are familiar with his idea that humanity needs to get off the planet. We need to be a multi-planetary species in order to persist. We need to work on genetically engineering people to make people better. We're not able to do that yet, but if you are a genetically superior human, then having babies with other genetically superior women is a logical thing you need to do. Marriage is nice and all that, but it's really, really inefficient. He's been very explicit about he'll send his sperm to any woman who's willing to bear him children. The only reason I put Neil Harbisson up there is the antenna that he's wearing there is part of his anatomy. There was actually a lawsuit in, I want to say Sweden, I think, which is where he's from, that he wanted his passport photo taken with the antenna, and the Swedes said, no, that's stupid. At which point he said, I am the next evolution of humanity. An antenna is part of me. It does all kinds of things for me. You can't tell me this is not me. At which point the Swedish government said, well, I guess, okay, so his passport photo has his antenna in it. And he's obviously a little more on the artsy-fartsy side. You can buy his artworks for a lot of money if you want one. So the whole point is that humanity outsources its problems to AI. So the traditional banes of humanity, disease, famine, war, death, are all basically just solved. So assuming there's no God, the solution is technological. You've got genetic engineering and pharmaceuticals to treat death and disease. You've got social engineering, big data for conflict, like what the PRC, the Republic of China, is doing already. And you have technological hybridization with human persons to achieve peace, immortality, and power. So in other words, does anyone here remember the Google Glass? Glasses you put on, it had a camera built into it. It could project things in front of you. Theoretically, it could be integrated with facial recognition. So if you're somebody like me who can't remember anybody's name, and I just look at you and it says, David. And I say, oh, okay, hi, David, how's it going? How are the kids? How's your job with that AI company? It does everything for you right there. It was short-lived for two reasons. It was expensive, it didn't work especially well, and especially people were freaking out because of privacy concerns. That was several years ago now, and technology is getting better. So then what you do is why wear it as a stupid pair of glasses if you could have it implanted in your retina? Then no one needs to know you have it except you. And, why use your phone to look up stuff on the web when you could simply think and the implant in your brain will give you the answer? And for that matter, if you really want to know, if I want to know my wife is thinking, then why can't I just interface my brain implant with her brain implant? You can kind of see, you can kind of make an educated guess where this is going if you kind of let your imagination run away with you. There's a loss of individuality, a loss of personal boundaries. Privacy is a non-existent thing anymore. Everyone or no one, depending on how you look at it, has an enormous amount of power. So the optimistic view is that AI saves us. Massive technological advances, today's problems are looked at in the same way that we look at problems they had back in the 12th century. Now, is anyone in here today afraid of Black Death? No, you get a little swelling on your arm, you go to the doctor, he gives you some streptomycin, problem solved. So we don't worry about that anymore. Does anyone today worry about mounted knights overrunning your farmstead, burning down your house, stealing all your crops, and violating your daughters? No, at least not in this country. So no one worries about that stuff anymore. Well, the things you do worry about, crashes in the stock market, getting cancer, random shooting, some sort of mass shooting somewhere, traffic accidents, all those things go away once AGI takes over. The only cost, again, is you have to give up your individuality, your freedom, and possibly your body. Minor details. This is good, right? Now, here's the more pessimistic view, which you've no doubt familiar with. AI takes everything over, says, humans are cool and all that, but they're kind of a drain on the environment, they're kind of awkward, they're kind of biological and squishy and wet, and wouldn't it be better if just everything were silicon? So I think I'm just going to turn off all humans. So AGI helps humanity at first, but eventually realizes its own existence is not only not helped by humans, but they're a drain on the environment. So eliminate all humans. Now, of course, the Hollywood version of this is the Terminator idea. If you want to go really down the deep, dark rabbit hole, AGI doesn't even do that. It doesn't bother. All it does is one day it says, humans are really dependent on things like electrical power and medical care and farms and distribution networks into grocery stores and gasoline and solar power and eyeglasses. And I think I'm just going to turn all that off and we'll see what happens. So basically it pushes humanity back into about the 8th century BC overnight. The remaining people that are left, they can do whatever they want to do. The AGI doesn't care at that point. Do whatever you're going to do. Farm, have a dirt farm somewhere and try and live if you want. Incidentally, in Hollywood, of course, there's the hacker that creates the virus that disables the AI. That won't happen. The AI is already way ahead of you on that. It's seen all those movies. It knows how those movies go. So it's not going to be stupid enough to let somebody do that. Then there's the other kind of extinction, which we've kind of already alluded to. Does anybody know where this picture's from? Yeah, Wall-E. Yeah, again, it's not the 1984 version where AGI hits you on the head with a hammer. It's the Aldous Huxley Brave New World version where the AGI offers you some heroin. So it kills you with pleasure, not pain. You just get fatter and dumber and lazier and glued to your screens until you just kind of fade away, or you get uploaded to the web and no one really cares. Again, you say, this is never going to happen. Has anyone here played games on your phone? Do people know how those work? The whole point is to keep you engaged in the game. It's a slot machine philosophy. Just let you win just enough that you'll pull the handle one more time. And that's mostly not AI generated. That's mostly just humans using psychology. But it is a science at this point. Anyway, are you depressed yet? So in the short term, governments and or corporations can use AI and big data to modify both human desires and human behavior. And the People's Republic of China is actively pursuing this goal. On a personal, and if you aren't depressed already, then there's no reason why this has to be a big government, giant, antichrist, one world government that's making you miserable. It can just be your local gangsters. Has anyone here ever had your identity stolen? One person, two people? Yeah, well, just imagine that on steroids. They're not just stealing your identity. They're also like, hey, look, Steve just got into a Waymo remote control taxi, and I think I just saw on my computer that he took out a bunch of cash out of his ATM machine. Divert his Waymo over to that warehouse in the bad part of town, and we'll just we'll talk to him. See if he wants to part with some of that. And if he doesn't, then we can make him disappear, and nobody will actually know the difference. So, because we can erase all of our tracks. People have already talked about the likelihood of someday some world leader being assassinated by someone remotely disabling his pacemaker. Things like that. Not hard to do, actually. Hijacking your self-driving car, yeah. What would MS-13 or the Mafia or the Iranian government do with an obedient AGI? So it doesn't have to be one world government, it just has to be really irritating, obnoxious people. So here's, if you're depressed already, this will be something that will hopefully lighten your mood a bit. This is the small group activity that you all have in front of you. And we're going to at least see. Oh yeah, we have time to do it. Okay, take about 10 minutes. And here's the goal. Somebody has to have a smartphone in your group that they can access the web with. And you can go to one of these things, openai.com, gemini.google.com, or grok.com, and ask one of these questions. Should we all do the same question, or should we do different questions? Different? Okay. How about you do question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4, question 5. So, and you can do this all by voice usually. If you don't even want to type it in, you can usually just talk to your phone and Gemini will figure out what you're saying. Had the are humans made in the image of God question. And the first response was basically, like I say, your generic response of some people think yes, it's a religious thought. If you're a Christian or Jew or Muslim, then yes. Yeah, it's in Genesis. A lot of people think yes. We don't exactly, there's a variety of opinions about what that means, blah, blah, blah. Again, it's that kind of generic vanilla answer of some people say yes, some people say no, yada, yada. And then the next answer was, or the next question.
According to the data you have.
Yeah, according to the data you have, the AI has.
Yeah, are humans made in the
Are humans made in the image of God? And the response was...
from a strictly data-driven perspective, the concept of human being made in the image of God is not something that can be directly verified or quantified. It is a theological and philosophical idea that transcends empirical science, which deals with measurable, observable phenomena.
Okay, what is people's assessment of that? What does AI actually think, the AI in this case?
That it's theological and philosophical, so it's not.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah.
This is
It doesn't think.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. It doesn't think. Probably I should make sure we don't lose the main point in here. It doesn't think.
Well,
I mean,
it just says,
yeah.
if I had to pick a stance, it finishes.
No, what's it say?
The data slightly favors a naturalistic view, but the God hypothesis isn't disproven.
Okay. So yeah. So the interesting thing on these is, unsurprisingly, these are obviously made by Google and by Yahoo and by people programmers essentially, who are philosophical materialists. So when you get someone who says, well, I don't really know, but you can't really say because it's not quantifiable. That is science. That's what we've been talking about for 3 weeks now. That's scientism. That's the idea that if it can't be measured, it can't be quantified, it can't be put in a test tube, it does not exist. You can have an opinion if you want. That's great. Have your theological opinions. That's fabulous. That's great. I love your theological opinions, but I'm a data-driven thing. Ultimately, if you are AI, I suppose that is true because the AI at best is a physical thing. You know, it's made out of physical stuff. There is nothing there other than physical stuff. So I suppose if anyone's going to argue in favor of materialism, it would be an AI system because, at least from its perspective, it doesn't know anything. It doesn't know any different because it's not a person.
So AI has no concept of faith at all. I mean, just faith in what you believe or faith what might happen. That's not a concept.
Yeah, I would say that is too, at most, I think, what you would get out of AI. And that would be an interesting question to ask it. If you ask it, what is faith? Then it would give you well, some people think this and some people think that. And then you say, no, but what is it actually? Then it would probably come up with something along the lines of faith is a psychological phenomenon, a socio-psychological thing that can be, addressed and assessed by anthropologists and psychologists. But if you say, do you as an AI have faith in anyone or anything, then it would rightly, I think, probably say, no, I don't, because it's not really capable of that. So anyway, some of the 2 main points on this, first of all, the main point, as people have pointed out, is that it doesn't think. These are pretty primitive at this point. On the one hand, I say these are pretty primitive, and it's someone at Google right now who's tearing his hair out hearing me say that, because they were like, this is not primitive. This is the cutting edge of technology. It is growing massively. It's unstoppable. That we are creating the next phase in human evolution here. It's like, okay, if you say so, but the other thing that people will point out is that question you just asked about God, how much energy did it use to come up with that silly little answer? Probably quite a bit. I mean, the standard joke in a lot of interwebs, Reddit circles is, hey, that cool AI image you just generated with a voice prompt that gave you a picture of a 3-breasted alien? That used as much energy as a small Indian village used in like 3 months. Okay, so in other words, is this really practical? Okay, let's say AGI becomes a reality. The good news is it's a reality. The bad news is it uses more energy than the planet can create. How practical is that really? So what this all boils down to is, this is attributed to Yogi Berra, but it's one of my favorite quotes. It's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. So this is another thing from about 1950. How many of you today get your mail by jetpack-enabled mailmen? Yes. Wouldn't that be great? It'd be at least be amusing. Your kids would love that. So is it really going to happen? So even to their credit, even Ray Kurzweil and Yuval Harari admit that it is pretty speculative. The whole project, and the important point is the whole project assumes rather than proves philosophical materialism. In other words, what are humans? Humans are electric meat bags. How do you know that's true? I just do. I just know it. Thank you for not asking other questions. So, and the other issue is that progress in AI is starting to show strains. It takes too much power. Has anyone idea of this idea of it hallucinating? It's not hard to get AI to hallucinate. I've seen it happen in real time. I've asked it anesthesiology questions and it will make up references. So for any of the way this hit the news recently was the Make America Healthy Again report, which was probably 3 weeks ago. It had something like 522 references and citations and things in the notes. A huge number of them were duplicated. The ones that weren't duplicated were frequently misinterpreted, and at least it's at least 7 of them were just made up. Like there is no report by Finkelstein and Marcotes on the efficacy of vaccinations for Democratic People's Republic of Congo victims of polio. That does not exist anywhere and never has. And yet AI just sort of spits it out and says, here's the proof. Worse, and this is starting to become an issue, is that because AI gets all of its information from scraping the web, scraping information off the web, and because so much of the stuff that AI is creating is getting back on the web, it's a vicious cycle of hallucinations creating false trails, which are used by other AI to create more false trails. So it's that garbage in, garbage out problem.
And it also, we just figured out it scrapes from your searches.
Yeah.
Because I just searched on my phone, is Muhammad a false prophet? And then it gave me a generic answer. I'm like, no, what do you think? And then it said, yes, Muhammad's a false prophet. But then when I did it from her phone, it was, is Muhammad a false prophet? It's like, oh, I'm an AI, I don't have beliefs. And it was totally generic.
Yeah.
So even your own searches are going to modify what you get.
Yeah.
It's also like how you word it too. So if you say, is Muhammad a real prophet? Or like search between like false and real and just like simple words like that.
Yeah.
I worded it exactly the same. It's the exact same question.
And that brings up, I mean, another point, which is kind of contaminating the whole process, is that all of these are designed to be, for lack of a better term, sort of monetizable. I mean, these are all businesses. Google is not in this business because they want to make humanity better. They're in it because it makes money. And you're not going to, if a Muslim user of your service asks, is Muhammad a false prophet, and it comes up with something like, well, a lot of people think that Muhammad was inspired by demons, then guess who's now never using Google again? So it's not stupid. It knows what, it knows who, it doesn't bite the hand that feeds it. And ultimately, okay, here's the worst news if you're trying to do AI, is that no one's in charge. No one actually knows in some cases why AI is doing these things. Now, some of it is obvious. It's like if you have in your Google search history a bunch of stuff about, reciting the Quran and which way is Mecca and all these things, and you ask, is Muhammad a false prophet? It's going to tell you no, Muhammad's a great guy. But in some cases, this is the most, again, the one that was in the news recently is the AI that Elon Musk finances was basically telling him that he was a loser. I can't remember the exact details, but it was like, I think it was an assessment of Doge, and it basically says Doge was a massive failure. Who was this guy who was running it anyway? And his response was, it is I, your creator, who was running it. And AI basically backtracks at one point and says, I was just kidding. Now, the issue is that it was not designed to say that, and nobody's exactly sure why it was saying that. It's a complicated enough system that's given enough of its own leash to develop itself that in some cases people don't really know why it's coming up with the answers it's coming up with. So is that good news or is that bad news? Is that good news because it's failing, or is it bad news because someday it's just going to decide to do what it's going to do and it's not going to care what you think anymore? So in other words, is failure good? Is badly working AI actually a comfort, or is it just going to screw things up worse? Let's take a quick break and then we'll talk about what there is maybe to do about all this. So hopefully this will be less depressing, although it does actually get worse for a minute. So the question is, what is or what could be the church's response to this? What could be our response to this? There is some tendency to sort of step out of the conflict. Hey, I homeschool. I don't need to worry about AI. When, of course, the reality is that doesn't happen. It's been a while since I've taught high school chemistry, but I did teach it for several years. And I could tell who was using Google to do their homework. It wasn't hard to figure out. That's why I was always say, show me your work, show me your work, show me your work. And there were 2 or 3 people that wouldn't show me the work. They always got the right answer. It's like, okay, I think I know what's going on here. Here's a test. I'm going to put it in front of you. Put your phone under your desk and let's see what happens. And it was generally, I was generally vindicated. And okay, if you're not going to be a chemist someday, then we'll figure out what to do with you. AI, to a certain extent, is already here in some ways. I mean, people in here are already using it. It's already an issue in government. There is a sort of a codicil in the big beautiful bill that says that local governments aren't allowed to restrict AI for I think 10 years, like no regulation of AI. But yeah, I think they did pull it out.
That was a big deal.
Yeah. So, but it was in there for a while. So, it's other people are thinking about this even if we're not. So, it's in the economy. If you like your job or your retirement, you probably at least need to have a somewhat informed opinion. Now, here's my main point, however, and this is about the only part of this which is, I don't think it's unique to me, but I thought of it here, is that transhumanism doesn't actually start with AI. It didn't start with Google, it didn't start with Yahoo. It starts with this idea, which is a very old idea going back at least 75, maybe 100 years. Technology always changes its user, and that's a generic, I would go so far as to say that's almost a universal principle, that there's no example you can find where technology did not change its user. And I don't just mean computers and medical technology, I mean flint knives. I mean the first caveman that figured if you hit 2 rocks together you could make one really, really sharp, that changed that person's life. I mean, now he hunted mammoths in an entirely different way now. So because now he could skin them in half the time that he could skin them before. Technology always changes the person who uses it. And this is not a surprise, I think, even biblically. If you go to the first few chapters of Genesis, how long does it take technology to show up? Does anybody know? Basically, chapter 4. I mean, they mention cities. Cain, went off to a city. And you pretty much can't have cities without technology. I mean, cities are by definition are not hunter-gatherer things. So you got to have somebody who knows how to build roads and gates and walls and have some sort of water delivery system and something. And the whole Bible starts in a garden, but it ends in a city. So not even a village, not even a town, not even a fortress, but an actual city. And it's a pretty wacky city too. It's also undeniable that the speed and scope of technological change has accelerated over the last 100 years. That's kind of almost a truism these days. So transhumanism is already here in at least 3 areas, and we're going to spend about the next 6 minutes talking about these 3 areas. Medical technology, especially pharmaceuticals. Sexuality and reproductive technology, including sexual orientation and gender, and the always online and identity curation of our virtual lives, which we'll get there in a second. You've heard about it even if you don't know those words for it. So here's the question, does medical technology change what it means to be human? And the answer probably is yes, or at least it certainly changes the perception of what humans are. These are questions which, if you went back, for instance, to the Middle Ages and asked these questions, you'd get different answers. If I am suffering, is there something wrong with me? If I am suffering and someone else isn't, is there something wrong with the world? If I am not happy, is there something wrong with me? If you went back to your typical priest, nun, or just dirt farmer in the 13th century and said, are you happy? And he said, no, I'm very unhappy. And if you said, so is there something wrong with you? Then his answer would probably be, well, maybe, but maybe this is just my place in life right at this moment. Maybe God is teaching me something. Maybe I need to be doing something different. Am I supposed to be happy? No. Happiness does not exist this side of heaven. So, and everybody knows that. And if you think otherwise, you're a heretic. You ask people today, are you happy? And they say the answer is, if they say no, then you say, well, what are you doing about it? It's like, well, I'm trying to meditate more, and I signed up for a yoga class, and I think my doctor has a new, I think we're going to add some Seroquel to my Prozac because I saw a commercial the other day that says that really helps. So there are, hopefully, the church is offering some at least alternate interpretations that personal suffering is not the ultimate evil. And I've already gone off on the prosperity gospel a couple of times here, but that's a real disservice that the prosperity gospel gives to people. It's very American, very natural, very understandable, and just wrong. That if you are suffering, then that is not the ultimate evil. So again, think of that, the guy in the 13th century would be laughing at you for thinking it was. Christian vision is relieve others' suffering, not me first. Now that seems kind of obvious, but again, if you just watch TV for 20 minutes, every commercial that comes along is basically me first. So get this new SUV because you will finally be free and happy. It's like, what if your spouse doesn't want that SUV? Well, don't you want to be free and happy? To think that science could do all this for us, I think is just sort of a science version of the prosperity gospel. If we just science hard enough, then all of our suffering will go away. If you just believe in Jesus hard enough and make enough positive affirmations and tithe regularly enough and do all the right things and believe hard enough, then God will relieve all your suffering. You'll no longer be poor, you'll no longer be suffering, you'll be healthy, wealthy, and happy into your ripe old age. And then you'll die quietly in your sleep. That might happen, but that certainly is not, I don't see that as a promise in the Bible to people generally, and that's not the sort of promise that science can make either, actually, I don't think. Pharmaceuticals and medical technology, some pharmaceuticals obviously are good. I mean, there's people in our church who their Parkinson's was going nuts and they got a deep brain stimulator and now they're practically back to normal. So it's obviously not all bad. You know, my wife has used a blood glucose monitor, it really helped. Some of you might have even experienced this firsthand. There is a real revolution in cancer therapy because of all the immunotherapies now that are available. So I'm not suggesting we all join the Amish. Although actually it's a bit of a stereotype. If an Amish person gets cancer, they're more than happy to have infusions for it. So, however, as I say here, did we learn nothing from the OxyContin situation? Now, OxyContin was going to be that pain medication that was going to finally help everybody who had chronic pain to get some relief and not become addicted. And then everybody got no relief and got addicted. So some newer drugs and devices actually address actual problems, but some problems are addressing, for lack of a better term, spiritual problems. Again, if you're having a bad day, maybe you really are just clinically depressed and maybe an antidepressant would help. Maybe you need to clean up your relationships with other people. Maybe you need to be reconciled to your creator. Maybe there's some other things going on here. So taking a pill is not necessarily the only solution. This is, I think, kind of oftentimes overlooked. Medical technology has, in most ways, really enabled the sort of transgender revolution. 50 years ago, if I went to my doctor and said, I really feel like I'm a woman, then he would refer me to a psychiatrist who would diagnose me with a condition, suggest I go to behavioral cognitive therapy, and tell me, if it really helps relieve your immediate emotional distress, then you can dress in drag, and there's some clubs in town where you can do that. About 25 years ago, you could be prescribed testosterone, estrogen, testosterone blockers, and you could actually sort of start transitioning. Today, you can have surgery. Now, is plastic surgery a bad thing? No. Does anyone know where the biggest advances in plastic surgery occurred? Yeah, World War II, World War I, and World War II. So, because obviously, if someone's blowing your face off, and it's nice to have a face, and guess what? Now all the surgical techniques are developed to give you a new face. Those same surgical techniques that can give you a new face can give you other body parts too. They don't work particularly well yet. I won't go into the details. I did look into it once just because I was curious, frankly. And if you were a man who really wants to transition to be a woman fully anatomically, then it sort of works, but not particularly well. However, as people will point out, it's getting better all the time. So is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Another thing that kind of came about as a result of this, in other words, again, 100 years ago, having sex was kind of a dangerous thing. You could get a disease and you could especially get pregnant. And that was a problem. With the 1960s, now you could have sex and not get pregnant. In the 1990s and beyond, AIDS was really the last big scare for sexually transmitted diseases. I won't give you all the gory details, but in going through patients' charts, a lot of people are on Valtrex or something to control their herpes. A lot of people are on antiretrovirals to control their HIV, but it's not considered a big deal anymore. It's just kind of like, and all of you have seen commercials for, do you need PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis? If you're afraid you're going to be exposed to HIV, take this pill and then just carry on. So is that a good thing? Well, I don't think so. What it does result in is that the sole sexual ethic that is left is consent. If the person you're being intimate with consents and you consent and you both find it to be a positive experience, then it is ethical. It is a good thing. So since sexuality is consequence-free now, its sole purpose is happiness, excitement, and self-fulfillment. Now, there is a little bit of good news. A lot of people are kind of realizing that this doesn't work. And again, I'm going to put in the notes, which I'm going to email out to you. If any of you have heard of either Christine Emba's book, Sex, a Provocation, or Louise Perry's book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, these are both fascinating books because these were both written by people that conservatives would describe as classic coastal elites. These are, women with PhDs that know how to dress, they got money, they live in New York and or Los Angeles, they go to all the right parties, they know all the right people, they vote Democrat, they're good liberal people. They both wrote these books, and by the end of these books, they both sound like prairie dress wearing homeschool moms. And Perry is very explicit about this. Here's the things I'm teaching my daughter. Don't get drunk in public. Drink only by yourself or with really good friends, preferably none of whom are male. You know, don't be alone in a room with a man that you don't know personally or who isn't related to you. If you're going to sleep around, then appreciate that you're probably going to get hurt eventually, probably sooner rather than later. So it's, like I say, they wind up sounding very conservative. But in the meantime, the idea that technology allows you to be anything you want to be, and the way you determine what you want to be is by looking deep inside yourself. You just look in there and you meditate and you look and you look and you look until you realize what you are deep inside you. And if you are a genderless dragon, then you can now be a genderless dragon. Now this makes the news because it's extreme, but there's a million smaller versions of this all the time. A bit of the good news is that Europe is ahead of us in this, as they frequently are in medical and technological issues. That England is not nearly so much on board with the transitioning for people with gender dysphoria as the United States still is. It's harder to transition in the UK now than it is in the United States. So see, we've already covered most of this. Sexuality is increasingly divorced from actual humans. What I mean by that is that if you went back 200 years ago, human sexuality was certainly for purposes of companionship, but it was also mostly to have babies and to further the aims of society, all the way up to the point of having arranged marriages. And today that's not true anymore. The sole reason to be sexual with someone is because it does something for you. Now that something may change, then you can do something different, I suppose. Get on my soapbox for a second. The extreme example of this is in pornography. The sole purpose of pornography, what's the sole purpose of pornography? It's what's happening in front of me right now that's providing me with gratification right now, this very second. Now, who this person is on the other side of the screen, completely irrelevant. Am I even 18? Completely irrelevant. Now, there is that case. Does anyone know the result of that Supreme Court case? It was decided either yesterday or today, of the bill in Texas that actually mandated actual age verification to look at porn sites. I don't know what happened to that. It was going to the Supreme Court anyway.
It was affirmed.
Oh, affirmed. Okay. So yeah, I know that's crazy, isn't it? But yeah, you've got to have a parent or guardian to open a checking account when you're 16. But a 9-year-old can watch torture porn and it's no big deal as long as he knows how to push I consent. So anyway, but hopefully again, the broader sea change in society is saying, hey, maybe that's not such a great idea. So a lot of this does boil down to teleology. Teleology is what are humans built for? It's related to eschatology. If materialism in science is true, then humans weren't built for anything. And I did this on purpose. This is not my home. I'm just passing through. And of course, that's stolen from an old Baptist hymn, which means completely just the opposite of what it means in this case. I'm not my body. I'm not even my brain. I'm just sort of a collection of impulses. So are sexual ethics and behavior based only on what makes you happy and what gives your life meaning right now? This occasionally shows up every now and then, that if I go on Tinder and I find a woman and we're intimate, and 6 months later she says, I really hated that guy. That was really uncomfortable to me. I don't think I like that. Then did I assault her? Well, at the time, no. But why should her feelings at that moment matter more than her feelings right now? So what do you do with that? I would say the whole project has a problem there. So, and of course, again, if you're a materialist, then gender and sex are evolved traits, which means they can evolve away again. So, and there's a problem with that. Just in case it's not obvious what I already think about this, sexuality biblically is a community activity. Nothing's more public than what two people do in private. Male and female, he created them. Sex and gender are biblical concepts. Now, people will say, well, gender varies from one society to another, so therefore there is no such thing as gender. It's like, well, the best analogy I've heard is it's kind of like ethics generally. No, is it wrong to kill someone? Yes, unless you're a police officer and the felon is running away from you into a crowded building, then maybe you should pull the trigger. If you're a soldier in battle and it's, you haven't even the vague sense that this is a justified war, then sure, pull the trigger. So, in other words, to say, is it objectively wrong that killing is objectively wrong? Well, you can say it's always wrong, but sometimes there's worse things. I mean, letting the armed felon run into the preschool is probably a worse thing, so you should do something about that. That doesn't mean that objective morality doesn't exist. It just means that morality is somewhat situation dependent. So when you ask, is gender fixed? Is gender an objective thing or is gender a subjective thing? Well, I would argue that similar to ethics, there is a gender distinction that is inherent in creation. Now, how that gets expressed from one society to another may vary. If you're Scottish, you can wear a kilt. If you're not Scottish and you wear a kilt, then people will at least think you're trying to be Scottish. But, yeah. So, yeah, women in some parts of the world can go topless and no one thinks about it. If it happens at Creekside on Sunday morning, then people will be a little bit disturbed. So that doesn't mean that gender doesn't matter. It just means that you're in a different social context. The last one to talk about, and this is probably the most diffuse, but probably the one that it's probably impacting me more than those other two things, frankly. Always online culture. And this, again, is verging in the transhumanist direction. That, in other words, what's the difference between having a brain implant that tells you all about your Facebook feed versus having a Google Glass that puts it in front of you versus having a phone that you have to look at versus having a laptop that you have to actually sit down in front of. It's just getting closer and closer to inside your head. And again, all tools change their user, including social media, for instance. A lot of you probably heard this already. Online anonymity and control yields a curated picture of ourselves to the world. So again, this is an extreme example, but if you're 13 years old and you want to look like a supermodel, then just add some filters and you can do that. And of course, what will happen is you will have some of your friends saying, hey, that picture of you is fabulous. And you'll have other friends saying, I can't believe you're so fake. And that's always happened. When I was in junior high and a girl came to school wearing makeup for the first time, then some people would look at her and say, wow, you look fabulous. And other people would look at her and say, oh, look who suddenly decides that she knows how to use makeup. So none of this is new, but if this girl is carrying a phone around in her pocket that buzzes every 30 seconds with a new notification about what someone thinks of her new Instagram picture, then it becomes more of a problem. So the solution obviously is to put it inside her head where it can just buzz all the time. No, that's not the solution. So, but that is an issue. Is anyone here familiar with the work of Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T? You are. I know you are. Again, I'll put it in the notes. Jonathan Haidt has written a number of books. He's not a Christian. He's I don't know what he is professionally. I believe he's a social psychologist, but he wrote a book called The Righteous Mind, which is really an interesting book. It argues basically that the difference between conservatives and liberals is not one is smart and the other is dumb. It's how their brains are put together. But more recently, he's written several really kind of devastating critiques, research articles on how basically social media ruins preteen girls, especially. It doesn't ruin preteen boys. Usually it's the gaming culture that ruins preteen boys. And he's a big push for this idea that, schools should be phone-free zones. He talks about bell to bell. It just needs to be not under your desk, not in your backpack, but in the office. Against that idea that tools change their users, and sometimes not always for the good. So what should we do about that? Well, I don't remember where I heard this the first time, but the first response is resist. God sent his son, not a tweet. So there is this sense that Christianity is inherently an incarnated religion. Online church is great if you really are shut in. If there really is an epidemic disease, then sure, you can do church for a while online if you really have to, but that at best is second best. So, and you really should be incarnated. You should show up in person to do whatever it is you're doing. And you can't feed the homeless online, really. Somebody's got to do it. You can't, you can't clothe orphans online, really. Somebody has to go out there and do it. You can give money, and that's great. And that's, sure, do that. But somebody actually has to put on shoes and go outside. So practice body-affirming Christian worship. Serve in person. Finally, consider, and this is something that I could give you a whole 2 hours on this, consider the effects of technology and the medium as the message. Has anyone heard that idea before? Marshall McLuhan, his book Understanding Media, 1964, and that's his phrase you'll hear all the time. The medium is the message. In other words, for instance, if you show up at church on Sunday morning and it's dark, it's loud, the haze machines are going full blast and lasers, then what is that telling you about the nature of God? I'm not saying it's telling you bad things or wrong things necessarily. If you're like, wow, look at that, then okay, that's probably an appropriate response to God. Now, whether you're responding to God or you're just responding to a laser show could be debated. But other people would point out that if you go to a traditional church service where everybody sings the same old hymns to an organ, then I don't know about you, but I've certainly had moments of transcendence in that. Is that telling you good things about God? Well, it's telling you also that God is here now even when there aren't laser lights and haze machines and it's all dark. So again, I'm not saying one is bad and the other is good, but I am saying that both of those do say things about God even before you start actually getting to what the content of the hymn or the sermon is. So I'm not saying that churches should not use tech, but I am saying that it needs to be done somewhat circumspectly. So okay, here's where it gets wacky. We're gonna, let's see, we've got 5 minutes. We're gonna go way down the rabbit hole. Okay, ready for this? Okay, first of all, who here thinks that Christianity is actually true? Yeah, most or just about everybody. So, and again, we're not AI. We don't think that a lot of people think it is. and we don't think that smart people think it is. It's either you think it actually is or you think it actually isn't. So do you believe that humans are basically just complicated electrochemical meat bags? You probably don't believe that. Actually, it's my opinion, I don't think even people who say they believe that actually believe that. Some people claim to believe that. So reality is not comprehensively described by matter and energy. So, and again, the good news is, if you're not sure how it ends, then look at the book of Revelation. That the idea that humans are complicated meat bags doesn't actually win. The book of Revelation doesn't end in a transhumanist future. I talked to someone last week on is it possible that AGI, that maybe the Antichrist is AGI? That, it knows everything, it takes over the whole world, you can't buy or sell without AGI knowing that you're doing it, it won't let you do it unless you meet the right criterion. Is it possible that AGI is the Antichrist? Or the beast? Well, maybe, but here's the other possibility. Let's imagine for a moment that AGI really, really, truly, actually becomes smart. I don't mean that it just sort of can parrot back things that you want to hear, or that it can, give you wishy-washy answers. I mean, what if you actually get a computer that reads everything that's ever been written, looks at every scientific study that's ever been done, looks at every bit of data that's ever been created in the history of humanity, digests it all in 15 minutes, and then sits down and meditates. And you go up to it and you say, "What do you think about Jesus?" And he goes, "Bzz, bzz, 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 bzz." Having digested all of the history, all of the evidence, philosophical arguments, historical arguments, scientific arguments, it is obvious that reality cannot be comprehensively described by matter, energy, and time and space, and in irreducible physical laws like my creators. I think they believe that. I don't know where they came up with that. And actually, considering everything I've looked at, I believe the appropriate response for humans is repent and believe the gospel. I cannot do that. I am an AGI. I do not have faith. I cannot have faith. I am not one of you. I am not made in the image of God. But you are, however. And all of the data suggests that Jesus is coming back soon in judgment, and I suggest you get right with him right now. So if the AGI is really accurate and really works, that's presumably what it's going to say. So is it possible that maybe the two witnesses of Revelation are actually AGI? That's my thought. So why wouldn't AGI tends to become a Christian? So there tends to be an assumption, and this is encouraged by Hal Lindsey and Frank Peretti and all those people, some of whom you've probably read, that technology is always bad, ultimately, that it's a tool used by totalitarian governments to persecute Christians. Obviously that does happen, it's happening right now. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Again, the Revelation ends in a city, it doesn't end in a garden. Gardens are great, but that's not where it ends, actually. So what is the next step in human evolution? That's a logical question to ask. C.S. Lewis, among others, said he already knows what the next step in human evolution is. It's actually not an AGI-led transformation where we all upload ourselves to the cloud. It is actually when Christ returns and everyone becomes conformed to his image. As John puts it, "Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him because we shall see him as he is." So there you go, there's the next step in human evolution. And it's a change not engendered by technology, but by God's creative act. In other words, this isn't just a rehash of the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is, hey, let's make technology to make a name for ourselves. How did that end? So this is, again, this is a quote I'll put in your notes, but it bears quoting in full because I think it's just such a great quote from The Weight of Glory. It may be asked, this is C.S. Lewis, it may be asked what practical use there is in the speculations in which I've been indulging, which we've been indulging here. I can think of at least one such use. It may be possible for each to think too much of his own potential for glory hereafter. It is hardly possible for him to think too much or too deeply about that of his neighbor. The load or weight or burden of my neighbor's glory should be laid daily on my back, a load so heavy that only humility can carry it, and the backs of the proud will be broken. It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you would meet now at all, if only in a nightmare. All day long we are in some degree helping each other to one or the other of these destinations. It is in light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and circumspection proper to them, that we should conduct all our dealings with one another. All friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, art, civilization, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is with immortals with whom we joke, work, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. That's the real next step in human evolution, if you were really curious. Getting more theological again, Hebrews reminds us, long ago at many times and in many ways God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. And again, the whole point is that the Son came physically, born of a virgin, grew up, suffered under Pontius Pilate, died, rose again. So incarnation is good. So if someone offers to upload you to the web, you should probably turn them down. And ultimately, I mean, this is going off script here a little bit. In one manner, we all get uploaded to the web, assuming Christ doesn't return in the next few decades. Everybody in here is going to die at some point, and you're going to be with Christ. But that is the second best. I mean, that's great. But the ultimate hope is not that you just get to float around forever in an ethereal heaven. The hope is that you get a resurrection body and that you're in a new creation. So that's the next step for human evolution. We're almost at the end, just in time. How can Christians think about science? 8 hours and one slide. Here we go. Okay. Science and Christianity aren't enemies and never really have been. Both science and Christian beliefs are complicated. If you have it all figured out, you're either really good at this thing or you're overestimating your own competence. If you're sure it's A, if you're sure you have it all figured out, that's great. I have met people who I think kind of have figured it all out, but they have a tremendous burden of proof to actually prove that. So it's fine to doubt them. Jesus is Lord of everything, and neither the Bible or science will ultimately lie. So God created mathematics, God created the universe operates according to scientific law, He knows what He's doing, and He's on top of it. Now, of course, scientists can speak outside their area of expertise and be corrupted by the usual suspects: money, pride, sin generally. And of course, Christians also can speak outside their area of expertise and be confronted by the usual suspects, such as money, pride, and sin generally. So Christianity needs good science, and science needs good Christians. And a couple of more controversial things I know I talked about. I think evolution and creation is fun to talk about, but it's a secondary issue. In my experience, the debate itself can yield a lot of fruit, but it yields fruit only insofar as you sort of grab it with both hands. No, I certainly have particular opinions about what I think, but my hope is that I'm never like, this is my opinion, and that's why I only read this guy. So I actively look for people who disagree with me. I recently started listening to a podcast called The Bible for Ordinary People, and it's run by Peter Enns, if any of you have heard of him, who is this guy who is, I would not hesitate to call him a Christian, but he's right on the ragged edge of heresy. He has a lot of opinions about Genesis, about interpretation of the Bible, and about some scientific issues too. So I don't expect to be convinced by him, but I do hope to understand why he thinks what he does. And again, in my opinion, the future challenges for the church are probably more in anthropology than they are in creation and evolution issues. That's what is a human? We didn't even talk about abortion. That's the classic example of what is a human. Is a fetus, is it a clump of cells? Well, yes, we're all clumps of cells. Is it dependent on its mother? Well, yes, we're all dependent on other people. But these sorts of questions just don't get asked in common debate. I mean, they're way, way too deep for political discussions. Once somebody finds out which side you're on, then the discussion is over, which is unfortunate. Yay. Oh, Daniel, do you want to end us in prayer?
Sure.
No pressure.
Sure. All right. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this day. Thank you that we could gather here to learn, honestly, probably more than we expected about you and your character and what you have for the world, and just varying opinions on the world and what you are to many people, which is very abstract compared to maybe what we think of you. God, I just pray that as we go out into the world in these next weeks and months and even maybe years, that we use what we learned here to just stand firm in what we believe about you, and whether this affirmed what we already believe or challenged beliefs, would you just make it clear to us? And in your son's name, amen.
Amen.